To quote the beautiful December Mint,
"Be you close or far from home, may the holidays be warm and cheerful for you. Merry Christmas!"
hello one and all, it's Bittle Productions, or We Sports Fan 78 for those still used to that alias. Thank you to the 350 plus subscribers, by the way. Glad you're enjoying my content. Wishing everyone at home a Merry Christmas. I hope everyone's keeping warm in their houses, or outside, wherever you're at in the world. I also hope everyone watching got the gifts they were longing for. Seeing as it's Christmas, I've got something special planned. It's a story about me's. We'll head to a Scottish town, namely Fort William, and focus on a lengthy family of me's called the Cardiffs. Our spotlights are shown on Nelson and Natalie, the youngest of the Cardiffs, as they serendipitously teach another individual the true meaning of Christmas. So, grab a cup of hot chocolate and make yourself snug as a bug with your sweetheart, for those with one, for our story will begin momentarily. A Cardiff Christmas, written and narrated by Bittle Productions. It was Christmas time in Fort William, and lots of snow was falling. Many a person decked their halls with boughs of holly. Carolers circled trees, heart to heart and in hand, singing songs themed around festivity. Others sat near the warmth of the fireplace with either their sweethearts or their family, and curled up a blanket or two while children merrily played in the snow all day long, rolling up huge snowballs and tasting snowflakes, for it was the season to be jolly and the season to give and receive. But most importantly, it was the season to be together with friends and family by your side. In the case of the slightly petulant Nelson Cardiff and his absent-mindedly demure little sister Natalie, who are 10 and 7 years of age respectively, you could say that it was their season to be all three tropes of the winter season. As much as they love receiving presents, they know very well that they're not the only thing that makes Christmas such a significant holiday. Something they learned from their parents, but not something Nelson and Natalie could teach someone else. Or rather, something neither Nelson nor Natalie could teach another. Until that all changed one Christmas day. Natalie was the first to wake up early that morning. She rose from her bed, merry as can be. As mentioned earlier, Natalie's a shy, precocious little girl who's as quiet as a mouse. But come the holidays, she's much more jolly, and rightfully so. She couldn't wait to celebrate, but there was just one problem. No one aside from her was up. They were all still asleep.
"I've got to get everyone to wake up,"
thought Natalie. Next to her, and still resting, was her brother. Waking him up wasn't that difficult, as Nelson was a very light sleeper. All Natalie had to do was whisper,
"Nelson!"
and Nelson was awake. His eyes hurt for a little bit. "Why are we waking up so early, sis?" her brother lethargically groaned. It's 5:30. Nelson was taken aback by his little sister waking him up so suddenly.
Don't you know what day it is?
Came the reply.
It's Christmas!
I am well aware, Natalie.
Now come on! We need to wake Mum and Dad up!
And off Natalie scampered to her parents' bedroom. Nelson,
I'll be there
evincing
in
a
a
sleepy
minute.
foot, sluggishly following. Their parents were just getting up when they heard the voices of their children squabbling about.
What's that, love?
Sounds like Natalie and Nelson are up as well.
Just then, Nelson and Natalie entered their room.
Merry Christmas, Mum and Dad!
Cheered the jolly pair.
And a Merry Christmas to you too!
Their parents cheered back,
You both sure are up early.
remarked their mum.
I think Father Christmas gave me an alarm clock this year.
Grumbled Nelson. The so-called alarm clock blushed a bit.
Oh, give her a break, Nelson. She's just making sure we're all ready for a time of merriment.
I guess ye could say that. In a way.
Ready to celebrate the most wonderful time of the year? Of course we are! Jinx!
And Nelson and Natalie scrambled downstairs to open their presents under the Christmas tree. Their parents followed. Nelson and Natalie had received quite a lot. For example, one of the latter's gifts was
A book about the history of the Cardiffs! Oh, how I've wanted this for so long!
She tightly squeezed the book, for she was oh so happy to get it on Christmas. As for Nelson, he had gotten vinyls, including Green Grass of Home by the late Scottish singer Sidney Devine.
Who'd Father Christmas can I love Sidney Devine?
But that wasn't all. He then found the late English railwayman Don Bilston's album Farewell to Steam encased in another present.
Oh, and Don Bilston as well?
And last but not least, Scottish railway fireman Dave Goulder's The Golden Days of Steam in another.
Dave Golder too!
Nelson and Natalie got quite a few other gifts too.
Look, sis! We've got matching coats, mittens, and boots in our stockings.
Really?
Aye, you'll see.
And soon enough, she did.
You're right!
See, sis? I told you they'd be there.
They weren't the only ones earning their most desired items, however. Their father began unraveling his gifts, and he found something very shiny inside one.
It's exactly what I wanted. A Charlotte Burney figurine.
Who's he, McKay?
Asked his sweetheart.
I don't believe you've told me about him, haven't you?
Not sure, Davina.
Answered McKay.
Must have forgotten. He's a pottery artist from the native family, the Burneys.
While McKay was busy admiring the figurine from all angles, his beloved wife started unwrapping her gifts. The first of her presents to be unwrapped was...
A cribbage board!
Cribbage was a game she played growing up, and it was her favorite. The board looked very unique, and had a rich wooden texture. Next
It's gorgeous!
was a diamond ring. Like her husband with the Charlotte Burney figurine, she admired the ring from all sides. It absolutely took her breath away. When she was finished, she opened the last present under the tree. In a dainty package was a box of both her and her husband's favorite chocolate. Artisan chocolates, the Scottish Highlands award-winning chocolate. They looked oh so tempting to eat, but she decided to save them for Christmas dinner.
Try these if you're not hungry for dinner. You'll love them.
She persuaded Nelson in response to the latter asking what the chocolate tasted like. And with that, the time for opening presents was over, but everyone was grateful for what they got. Nelson and Natalie spent the whole morning reading Natalie's book about the Cardiffs, all the while listening to Nelson's records on the phonograph the pair patched up about a few months ago.
Look, Natalie, there's that conqueror, Balfour Cardiff the First.
I see. What's he famous for?
Well, conquering and things. I honestly just skimmed through that whole page.
Meanwhile, Davina showed off her ring to McKay,
Isn't it shiny?
It sure is, honey.
and a little while later, they were having quite a tough time finding a place to put the statuette.
Shouldn't it be on that drawer?
No, I think it should be standing in front of our mirror.
This went on for some time, and Nelson and Natalie could hear them from their bedroom.
Well, I think it's getting on top of the drawer. It doesn't sound rich compared to everything else. Are you saying all the way from the muffin? Oh, no, not at all. I'm just saying.
Should we help them?
Dinner fashions. They'll figure it out soon.
Are you sure?
Trust me, sis. I can double as a fortune teller.
And Nelson was eventually right.
Why don't we put it on the nightstand? Why didn't I think about this before?
See, sis? Your brother can double as a fortune teller.
As you could plainly tell, all four were having a merry time already. But the best had yet to come. The clock struck 5, the sun was setting, and Davina had just begun preparing a scrumptious Christmas feast.
You mean to say that
Nelson and Natalie were chatting with each other about what they had read. Meanwhile, McKay was busy on the phone with some of the guests invited.
Yes. On your way? Oh, with Sabrina? Great. I'll see you when you're here.
After the call, the Quo were settling in for the evening, awaiting the arrival of said guests. They sat in the warmth of the living room, where they could hear the crackling of fire coming from the fireplace.
How'd you two enjoy your presents?
Their mother asked Nelson and Natalie.
Oh, they were great.
And I didn't know a shrunken Angus Cardiff the Fourth had intercourse with a sprite.
I'll get it.
McKay walked up to the door and opened it. Before him stood a man he felt overjoyed to see again. It was the man he was on the phone with.
Why, if it isn't Reynolds Sheffield.
Reynolds Sheffield was an old friend of McKay's from Derbyshire who worked in a short-lived bookstore. They parted ways when the latter was given the sack for a wrongdoing that wasn't his doing. Seeing as he was so happy to see Ranald again, McKay gave him a bear hug of reunion. As Ranald and McKay talked endlessly about what happened during their separation, in the distance, Nelson, whose fingers were dusty from switching vinyls, could see that a blonde little girl wearing a pink coat was consistently falling into the thick snow head first. It was Reynolds' 6-year-old daughter, Sabrina. He put on his boots, as his mittens and coat were already on from playing outside in the snow with his sis. Nelson walked outside and opted to give Sabrina a hand, but all he got was her smacking his hand away. He was taken aback by this. She picked herself up and snootily walked inside, uttering but a word to anyone.
Is she your daughter, Reynald?
Why, yes. I should mention, she isn't a big fan of the cold. I don't blame her.
Well, come on in. Make yourself welcome. I'm cooking a Christmas dinner tonight.
And Reynald went inside. A brooding Nelson followed. The latter's father could tell he was feeling quite miffed, but he wasn't sure what he was miffed about.
Is something wrong, Nelson?
He asked Nelson.
Aye,
Muttered Nelson.
Is that Mr. Sheffield's daughter? It sure is. What about her? Isn't she lovely? Lovely, me fifth front spike in me hair.
Nelson protested.
What on earth did she do that I missed then? Well, I offered her a hand with the snow, and said hand gets slapped away. I see. I'm sorry I didn't see that. I must have been too into Reynolds' story. I'd love to help, but woman, I've got to make our guests comfortable. So keep a close eye on her for me, and let me know if something's off about her. Right, I will.
While Davina was preparing the dinner, and McKay and Reynolds were busy catching up with each other, Nelson, Natalie, and Sabrina huddled near the fireplace together. Neither three said a word to each other, as they were all too cold to open their mouths. When the former two were warm again, Natalie turned to Sabrina. She wanted to ask the latter her opinion on festiveness and winter. Unfortunately, Sabrina was still feeling frigid, as instead of replying to Natalie, all she said was a curt
What?
and just as she was about to open her mouth, Natalie was rudely cut off by Sabrina demanding,
If you're going to ask me anything that's to do with Christmas that's not what I got, don't ask. Pardon? You heard me. If you're going to ask me anything about Christmas that's not about my presents, just don't ask.
Sabrina snobbishly turned away, her back facing Nelson and Natalie. It's worth noting that the latter isn't just quiet, but also a very sensitive person. Natalie's fragile heart sank, and she began to sniffle. More than anything in the world, Nelson hated seeing his little sister upset on such a jolly day, and, like the protective brother he was, he intervened.
What makes you such a Scrooge that you have the presumptuousness to say something like that to my sister?
He interjected.
I'm not a Scrooge.
Sabrina impetuously replied.
I just find the quote-unquote most festive time of the year rather boring if you ask me.
Is that so?
Suddenly, Natalie snapped out of her sadness. She meekly asked Sabrina,
You've never had any presents? No, I always have. I just don't understand. What else is there to Christmas besides them?
An impulsive Nelson was just about to get up to tell McKay about what was unfolding, before Natalie looked at him and nodded, for she had a plan. Now there are a couple moments in Natalie's life when she is wiser than her fractious brother, and this was one of those moments. She scooted beside the sulking Sabrina and asked her,
Can you think of a memory you were at your happiest during the winter holidays?
Sabrina thought hard and long. Too long for someone alongside her and Natalie.
Sorry to disrupt your grand plan, sis, but what exactly is it?
Nelson's sister gave him a look as if to tell him his petulance was unwarranted, and Nelson promptly closed his mouth. And after a lengthy period of deep thought, Sabrina came to her happiest memory.
I remember last December when my parents took me to Cairngorm to go skiing with my friends.
Cairngorm was a mountain in Aviemore, a neighboring town in the Highlands.
Aviemore?
Nelson piped.
That's the place I was born.
Yes, good for you.
Why? What's that supposed to mean?
I was the happiest I'd ever been. From the drive down to Aviemore to the moment I arrived. Who are you with? Please tell us.
Beseeched Natalie.
Well, if you really must know, I was with the Laslet twins, Lynette and Lisette.
Both Natalie and Nelson looked puzzled. Neither of them knew of any me named Lisette or Lynette. Luckily for them, Sabrina was kind enough to tell them.
They're identical twins, Lynette from Leicester, Lisette Bicester. Both are hyperactive, as their parents put them, but they're very funny. Anyhow, they were so glad to see me. They shouted, Sabrina, you're here! When my parents and I made it.
Sabrina felt a little warmer now, so she kept on reminiscing while Nelson and Natalie attentively listened.
The three of us climbed uphill with our instructor, Miss Adair, while all of our parents watched from a cottage, although I had a bit of trouble. How so? Well, I'd never skied before, and I kept sliding every which way. Whoa. Ah, help! I'm slipping! Sabrina, hang on! I'm coming! Luckily, I didn't crash into anything, thank goodness for that. But when I did get the hang of it, Lisette, Lynette, Miss Adair and I went down the hill like mad women. We got into some shenanigans going down, much to Miss Adair's concern. For example, Lisette tried to perform an aero donut after a jump. Watch this, girls! Amazing, Lisette! Stop showing off! You'll get yourself hurt! I'd never gone as fast as I was going before. I was really enjoying it. This is fun! And after we'd gone downhill, we were just in time for cups of hot cocoa when we got to that cottage. My mum and dad were chatting with the twins' parents and Miss Adair, while Nat and I were stuck hearing Lisette slurping. Could you be any louder? Are you saying they can hear me from here? No, but we can. I think you both are just overreacting. That must have been rather annoying to hear while you both were relaxing. It was, but it didn't last long, however. Lisette's a fast sipper, but I wasn't going to let some slurping spoil my fun.
Sabrina wasn't crabby now. She felt much better, and that's when she realized something about Christmas's purpose. It wasn't all about receiving presents. Instead, it was about having fun and spending time with the people you cherish. Sabrina was so nonplussed by how grouchy she was to Nelson and Natalie before the latter's question that she did an about-face and walked out of the room for a moment.
I think your question worked, Natalie.
Nelson whispered to his sister.
My apologies for underestimating it.
Sabrina came back in before Natalie could reply, and she had a regretful look on her face rather than a smile.
I'm sorry I was rude to you two.
She apologized.
Now I see the true meaning of Christmas.
Well, Natalie and I are glad you do. I'm sorry I was cross with you. That was a lovely story.
Sabrina's apology was cut short by the ring of a doorbell. Seeing as Sabrina was already standing up, she went and opened the door. When she opened it, she was greeted by the sight of the Laslett twins as well as Miss Adair.
Sorry if we're late.
It's Sabrina! Lisette! Lynette! Miss Adair! It's so nice to see you three again!
The four spent a few minutes simply catching up with each other, as well as Sabrina's father. Meanwhile, Nelson and Natalie's mum and dad were talking to their children.
Who's Sabrina?
Asked their father.
She's lovely now. Well, I'm glad your charm made her as right as rain. Oh, dinna thank me. It's my sister you should be pleased with. She's the one who made her snap out of her crabbiness.
Natalie blushed again.
Well, I wasn't trying to do that.
She bashfully interjected.
Is dinner ready? Nearly. Can't stay to talk. We've got to introduce ourselves to our additional guests.
And so they did, while the two siblings stretched out their bones and muscles, for they had been sitting for quite a while.
I feel like an old man,
remarked Nelson. A little while later, Sabrina introduced Nelson and Natalie to the Laslett twins and Miss Adair, all of whom had never heard of the Cardiff family before. The six shared some very interesting stories together, and then came the moment. The Cardiff's mother called from the kitchen,
"Come inside the dining room, you six. Dinner's ready."
Everyone, including Davina, the one who cooked the meal, was famished. They couldn't wait to feast. The Cardiffs, the Sheffields, the Lasletts, and Miss Adair encircled the table, sitting beside one another. Each of them said their blessings, while holding the hands of the person to both their left and right. After they said them, it was time to dig in. It's fair to say that Davina had cooked quite a scrumptious dinner.
This turkey's delicious,
Reynolds remarked.
It's exquisite,
commented Miss Adair.
This is quite a storm you've cooked up,
said McKay to his wife.
Can you teach us?
Asked Nelson and Natalie together.
I can, but it'll have to wait for another day. How about New Year's?
Sabrina, Lynette, and Lisette, who were sitting next to each other, were busy eating their slice of turkey. Luckily for the former two, they weren't hearing any loud licking from Lisette.
Nice to know you finally have table manners,
teased Sabrina. Lisette's face reddened.
Oh, stop that, you!
Everyone feasted until they were stuffed. And a few people, who still weren't full after the turkey, got a chance to try the artisan chocolates, namely Nelson, Natalie, Sabrina, Lynette, and Lisette.
It's heaven in me
This
mouth.
is tasty! Why, this is the most delicious thing I've ever eaten! Scrumptious!
They all declared. When the feast had ended, what originally was a Christmas dinner somehow turned into a Christmas party. They had a holly jolly time. They sang and danced to lovely festive songs and played many Christmas-themed games. Unfortunately, like all good things, the party had to come to an end, and the Laslett twins, Miss Adair, and the Sheffields all had to go home. They said their goodbyes, and Sabrina gave both Natalie and Nelson a bear hug, expressing gratitude to them for changing her formerly frigid opinion on Christmas. After the guests' departure, it was 10 o'clock, half an hour past the siblings' bedtime. The pair kissed their parents goodnight. Natalie had something rather sweet to say to her mother, while Nelson had already gone to sleep. She giggled before she said her prayers.
You're lucky Father Christmas left you those chocolates.
Much to her mother's bliss. Her mom chuckled.
I sure am. How were they? I couldn't hear you over my darling's chattering. They were delicious.
Their conversation was interrupted by the light-sleeping Nelson tossing and turning, for he couldn't stand his rest being heckled.
I think you'd best get yourself in bed now,
Her father chortled.
for the sake of your brother. You can tell us about the chocolates tomorrow, and how you changed Sabrina's heart.
Natalie giggled, and she soon fell fast asleep, dreaming a sweet dream relating to Sabrina's story.